Hello, and welcome to another episode of Pampering Myself Podcast. Today, we're going to dive into a subject that many of you, including myself, may or may not know about, or let's say recognize within yourself. That is imposter syndrome. I personally became aware of this term as an attendee during an event some time ago. And when I responded to this question, I was identified as having imposter syndrome. The question was, name one thing that has held you back from moving forward with your dreams or your goal. And I responded, I never felt like I had enough information, or I wasn't confident in the information I had, which caused me to spend hours and hours of researching and taking class after class in an effort to gain confidence or validate my information. Always feeling like I didn't have enough knowledge, resources, or assistance, which caused me internal doubt. And believe me, in hindsight, some of those excuses were really lame. And after responding to that question, another attendee shouted out, imposter syndrome. Well, I really didn't know what that meant at the time, but I did what I would naturally do. I looked it up. In other words, I did my research. Now, imposter syndrome is that nagging voice in your head that comes up with all kinds of excuses as to why you don't follow through, complete an assignment, a project, etc. But what it's really saying is you're not good enough. So you find any reason to not follow through, consciously or subconsciously. Now, in my case, searching high and low for additional information and enrolling in class after class after class was my way of buying more time. In other words, avoidance, procrastination. And if I did this long enough, eventually, whatever I was working on would never come to pass. Now, I never considered there was an underlying reason. I just chalked it up and put it to the side. But after being called out, or should I say, identified as having imposter syndrome, I had to be truthful with myself. If I'm being really truthful, it's been an issue going way back. I would always come up with all types of excuses. Now, don't get me wrong. There were a lot of successful projects I've completed, just as there were valid reasons for not completing others. Now, when I look back on my successes, I was more determined, invested, focused. And although I was never one to share my accomplishments, especially if they weren't within the circle I received it in, you would never know. Here's a perfect example. I was a member of Toastmasters International, and I earned 3 what we call DTMs, Distinguished Toastmaster Awards. And in Toastmasters, that is a big deal because there is a lot of work you have to put behind that. Besides preparing speeches and presentations, there's leadership and all levels of Toastmasters. And I had earned 3 in a relatively short amount of time where people had only earned 1 or none. But see, I would always tell myself I did it for me and not for others because I looked at that as bragging. Maybe it was the time period I grew up in. I don't know. Because people nowadays don't really have a problem with, I don't want to use the word bragging because I don't think it is, from what I understand, of sharing their accomplishments. But however, according to the research, clearly, not sharing one's accomplishments is a sign of imposter syndrome. So let's look into the research. Now, according to an article written in Forbes, psychologists Pauline Clancy and Suzanne Eames first identified this condition in 1978. And initially, it was thought to be unique to women, and it was identified as anxiety. Then in the mid-'80s, Pauline and Gail Matthews, who was a professor of psychology at the Dominican University of California, teamed up. And they came up with this idea of conducting a survey. And the results showed that about 70% of people from all walks of life, men and women, have felt like imposters for at least some part of their career. In some of my Facebook groups where women discuss business, strategies, and things that help them advance, fear seems to be a running theme. The fear of going live. That's live on Facebook. Because social media is an excellent marketing tool, and the best part, it's free. But so many of the women admit fear keeps them from growing their business, even though they know going live may be the difference between success and failure. Some share the reasons and others don't. But regardless, to them, the reasons are valid. And to be truthful, I had a fear of going live when I first started this podcast years ago, which is why it is audio. Have you ever felt fearful about something? Perhaps making a mistake or anxious about being seen? Most won't admit it, but there are some who will. And that is the first step in overcoming imposter syndrome. So I'm here to publicly admit I have imposter syndrome. And according to my research, here are a few indications that you may be suffering from imposter syndrome. Again, knowingly, unknowingly. And I say unknowingly because a lot of times we feel justified for not doing something. And it may all be legitimate. But ask yourself the why. Truthfully, to yourself, not to me, not to anybody else, the deep down why. Why are you not getting out there, completing your goals or your dreams? And you may stumble on something that you didn't expect. So here's what the research says that you may have imposter syndrome. I have 5 reasons that they have identified. Number 1, a person that works too hard. Because people with imposter syndrome often work too hard for multiple reasons. And here's 3 of the reasons. Fear of failure. They worry that any mistake will reveal their perceived incompetency. So they overwork to avoid failure at all costs. Notice that word perceived, because a person who has imposter syndrome and have identified it may perceive it, or they may not. They may just continue to work hard because they want to make sure it's right. Overcompensation, to mask their perceived lack of ability. They overcompensate by putting in an excessive effort. And then the third one is lack of self-confidence, doubting their own skills and knowledge. They put in extra effort to ensure that they are prepared and competent. Number 2, you may be or may have imposter syndrome if you downplay your knowledge, abilities, or skills. Wow, now that seems interesting. I don't know if people intentionally downplay. They may. When I ran this inside of my head to think if that was something I may have done in the past or currently do. There was something to that. Because people who downplay their knowledge or abilities, they tend to seek as many certifications and diplomas as possible or to showcase their values to others. That's what all of the certifications and diplomas, because they feel that what they have is not enough. Like what I've done over the past 3 years, class after class after class. I had to ask myself eventually, when is enough enough? Because I start to recognize that class after class after class, I could do this forever. I used to know this lady that had 5 master degrees and a PhD, and she was still in school. And when I asked her what was her drive, she explained education was a high priority in her family. Now, this lady was in her 50s at the time, still trying to prove something to her parents, never feeling that she had enough. I can't remember what her nationality was, but she came to the United States as a child and had been in school all her life. This lady had so much knowledge. She even cited the books of the Bibles, not only forward, which is something a lot of people can't do, but backwards. It just blew my mind. Of course, at the time, I just thought she was driven. The third reason or explanation that you might have imposter syndrome is to be seen as a perfectionist. Now, this was also a surprise to me because I know plenty of people who identify themselves as a perfectionist. And truth be told, I've walked a fine line myself, looking over every single detail, checking and double checking to ensure perfection, which we know is impossible. It's been said many people with imposter syndrome set extremely high standards for themselves, believing that anything less than perfection confirms their inadequacy. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of stress on yourself to really think that you have to do something so perfect that it just gets in the way. And I've seen people not complete a task. I've done it myself. I remember trying to do a presentation at a Toastmasters meeting, which means it wasn't really for the public, but it was for the club. And I was experimenting with a product, some new toy I had that was supposed to show some visuals. And even though the whole purpose of Toastmasters is prepare you for things that could possibly happen, I refused to perform. I refused because that slideshow was supposed to be a part of my presentation. And I felt that if I could not implement that into my presentation, that it was not going to be what I wanted it to be. Perfect. I'm just saying. Number 4 is lack confidence. When it comes to showing your accomplishments, speaking up or contributing to conversations or projects, you might be afraid of being seen as silly or arrogant or unknowledgeable. I can identify with this as well. As I stated earlier, if you're not in my circle of where my accomplishments were earned, you'll never know unless it comes up by other means. Once again, doubting one's skills and knowledge might result in putting in extra work to ensure that you're prepared and competent. Overcompensating. You may have even convinced yourself you were better behind the scenes, a way of hiding from others. so you don't have to be judged. That's right. Some people with imposter syndrome like to think that, oh, I do better behind the scenes. No, I'm not going to stand out in front. I don't like attention. I don't want people knowing my business. All kinds of excuses that really only they can come up with. But see, the thing about imposter syndrome is a lot of times people can recognize other people's faults. But it's funny, we can't recognize our own. So I may identify that someone else had what I now know as imposter syndrome, although I may have called it something else or what it was, but I did not identify it within myself because clearly some of these things that the research stated is imposter syndrome characteristics I have. And number 5, you may have imposter syndrome if you tend to be a people pleaser. Focusing more on doing what others want and expecting their validation. Now, to avoid disappointing others, individuals may overcommit themselves to tasks and responsibilities, and this can lead to excessive workloads, stress, burnout, and further fueling feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. Now, another one that I can understand because there were times I don't know if I was competing with myself or I wanted to prove that I had the skills or knowledge in doing something. So it's about self-evaluation, really understanding who you are and why you do the things you do. But there's good news. Here's 5 tips on how to overcome imposter syndrome, according to Cinda Paulise. Number 1, stop overworking. Set boundaries at work or within your business that are healthy for you. Anything that you do, there should be boundaries. Boundaries for your family, boundaries within your job, boundaries within yourself. Number 2, set realistic standards. Now, we know a lot of times we have goals and visions and dreams and things that we want to accomplish. And people always say the sky's the limit. If you don't reach for it, you'll never achieve it. But realistically, is it something that is possible? Well, you never know. Things happen. But if you're going to shoot for them and work towards them, you have to set realistic goals. Otherwise, you set yourself up for failure. Number 3, accept good enough. Don't look for perfection because perfection doesn't exist. I had to come to grips that there are some things I can and cannot do. And there's some things that I'm good at and some things that I'm not good at. And I read an article or a statement in this book by an author that I found very interesting. A lot of times people tell you, work on your weakness. But his theory was in reverse. He said, if you work on the things that you are really good at and improving those, then it will help with your weakness. So I had to think about that, thinking about a weakness maybe that I have and how I can improve it by working on my strengths. So just try that. It may work out. Number 4 is celebrate success no matter how small. Write them down or keep them documented so that you can go back and check when you feel down or not good enough. You don't need a Nobel Prize to be considered worthy. You just have to be considered worthy within yourself and not worry about what others think. And that's the suggestion that was given to the ladies in the Facebook group who are fearful of going live. Those who do it all the time brought up the fact that people on Instagram, on Facebook, a lot of social media, they show up perfect. They show up with their hair combed, their makeup on. Everything was perfect. I had a lady who showed up who was teaching us in one of the courses with no teeth. And I'm not saying that to shame her, but she wanted to let us know she was getting dentures done. She didn't have any teeth in her mouth. She apologized for how she might look to us, but she felt it was more valuable for her to give us the information that we were seeking than what we thought how she looked. And no one cared because we were there for the purpose of giving the information and she was there for the purpose of providing it. And then when she got her teeth, the only thing was when I noticed, I said, something's different about her. And it's funny because I didn't even recognize that she had her teeth or didn't have her teeth. After a while, it didn't even matter. So show up who you are. Everybody that's on Facebook or Instagram or any of these social medias most people are putting their best foot forward. But sometimes you have to go and do whatever it is that you need to do, however you are. And number 5, talk to yourself compassionately, as if you're confronting your best friend. Acknowledge that you're human and imperfect like everyone else. Imposter syndrome can hit anyone: students, professionals, artists, athletes. It doesn't matter how successful you are, you can still feel like you're just winging it and hoping no one notices. Although the research states characteristics of imposter syndrome is when you feel like a fraud despite your success, I believe fraud may not be the right word. But who am I? For me, it was more about self-doubt. However, doubting your abilities and worrying about what others think is imposter syndrome, according to the research. People with imposter syndrome often push themselves too hard to prove their worth and seek validations from others. This can lead to stress and anxiety. In the end, dealing with imposter syndrome is about recognizing that those feelings of doubt and fraudulent aren't a true reflection of abilities. It's important to remember that everyone has moments of insecurity. The key is to challenge those negative thoughts, appreciate your achievements, and be kinder to yourself. Seeking support from friends, mentors, or therapists can make a big difference. And over time, you can start to see your true worth and feel more confident in your skills and accomplishments. And to that, I bid you a great day, a farewell. And to take heed to this information, whether you think you have imposter syndrome or not, you are perfect in who you are. And don't forget to pamper yourself. Have a great day.